Tonight's specific topic is the Board of Ed's operating budget. And with that, Ms. Milton, I will ask you to call the roll.
Mr. Slocum. Mr. Walsh.
Here.
Mr. Burway.
Present.
Mr. Jinks. Here. Mr. Mylone.
Here.
Ms. Nichols.
Here.
Ms. Pavano. Mr. Talbot.
Here.
Mr. Villabur. We have a quorum present.
Let's rise for the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, thank you. I will turn this over to our august operating officer of the budget and to introduce the topic at hand and take it from there, David.
Thank you, Mayor Slocum. I appreciate that. Council members, good evening and welcome. As we continue our budget reviews, we have met with all of the general town government departments in our previous workshops. And now is the largest budget and the one that has also passed through a co-elected body before it's come to us, and that is the Board of Education. And I want to thank Dr. Solon and Mr. Messiana and others, board members, for being here and ask if you're ready. We're ready and for your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Barwi and
Thank you.
Chairman Slocum, members of the council. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the work that has been conducted over multiple months and several meetings with, as you mentioned, the chair of the board, Mr. Perugini, vice chair and chair of finance committee, Mr. Grippo, and all of the members of the board put a lot of time and energy into this process. And so we're excited to kind of share with you where we are. We think it's a fiscally responsible path forward through what has been anything but typical last 2 years. So, Mr. Kimball, would you mind hitting the screen, pretty please? Yes, I could hear the applause if I was on the other side, but I want to see it too. So, thank you. You folks okay in the back there? You be able to see it all right? All right. Hey, hear the hamster running now. Okay, here we go. So I like to start with pointing out our destination. This is something that the board adopted back in 2016 after significant input from the community and our various stakeholders, that our real priorities are complex thinking and social emotional learning. And you'll see that our budget is really filtered through that lens. We provide instruction, of course, to 4,274 students, but we're also responsible for so much more than that. The mental health, nutrition, and medical care to allow access to instruction, specialized services through special education support, and EL, English language learning supports, as well as a really diverse myriad of opportunities for kids to engage in activities outside of the traditional academic day. So clubs and theater and music beyond the school day, and of course athletics as well. And then transportation to and from school. That's a significant undertaking as well. So this is why we provide, the kids are at the center of what we do. And it's an honor to be able to serve and positively influence our life, as I know the board shares that sentiment. And we take that responsibility for not just our kids, but our broader community very seriously. So the budget environment this year, I mentioned, of course, we're all aware of the pandemic and in the context of that experience, but our student enrollment is climbing significantly. And we will be talking a little bit about that later on. And then, of course, medical benefits, we're all sensitive to, in addition to the fact that, we have aging facilities and increasing cost of special education services. Some of the external influences, obviously the state of the state, which thankfully is in a pretty good place right now, and we have a clear picture of what our funding will be. And sometimes, in budget years, we don't have that. So that helps stabilize this year's budget. State and federal education revenue, we did receive about $2.2 million from the federal government. That money was slated for 4 years. We've spent about half of that money so far, dating back to 2020. I'm sure you've seen the Cheshire Public School circus tents that were up all over town for the last couple of years. That was very expensive. Additional nurse staff time, masks, things like that, added up, and basically it's about half of the revenue, or half of the money that came in from the state, or federal government, excuse me. The other half was spread out over about 3 years for recovery services for students. I neglected to mention intraday cleaning, which was a significant part of that first half of the money. So this year we added some assistant principal supports, additional math and reading intervention supports, and mental health supports throughout the district. So our initial internal budget request. So this is the percentage that this was based on what our administrators identified as needs within their buildings, was 7.62%. Our historical budget expenditures, you can kind of see what our 6-year average was. It's been pretty lean. During those windows, at the early part of that history there, we had been in declining enrollment. Not that necessarily made it much easier, but certainly budgets in that range would be, as I will show you later, nearly impossible to navigate without significant cuts, given the incredible growth in enrollment that we've been experiencing over the last, I'd say, about 12 months. Where do we kind of fall within our peers with respect to how much money we spend per student? So this is a very, very simple calculation. How many students do you have? What was the budget of the district? And you divide it out. So in Cheshire, last year we spent $18,156 per pupil. The state average is $20,707, for a difference of $2,551. So we spend less than 122 of 126 school systems in Connecticut. Our budget increase on an annual basis, basically, would be $10.5 million more if we spent what the state average was. Compared to our peers in Durg B, towns that, I think you would kind of compare us to, the Madison, West Hartford, Simsbury, Avon, Farmington, those communities, on average, the budget would have to be $5.5 million to reach the average within Durg B. So we sit near the bottom of Durg B. Nevertheless, I think we punch well above our weight class. So these are some of the historical budget management strategies that we used in years past, with kind of navigating those percentages. I showed you a few slides back. Enrollment is no longer available to us, and I'll kind of elaborate on that. Line items that are the same or less than they were 5 years ago are really unsustainable in the face of the enrollment increases that we're seeing. The items in black are things that we continue to leverage. We haven't increased participation fees, but they exist to offset things like maintenance around parking areas and participation fees that offset the cost of athletics as well. And so these items in black, as I mentioned, are things that we have been continuing to try and leverage. So these are from our New England School Development Council. They are a firm that many districts throughout New England use to provide enrollment predictions. And we've used this in this forum. I'm sure those of you who've seen it, who've been here a while, have seen this many, many times. We use NESDEC to help us kind of project where we're going as a school system and a community. And what you see on the left is from 2011, I think that is, through 21. And you can certainly see that trend line. And then you see from 21 to 31 in that opposite trend line. We've reached the trough. The trough is actually behind us on the curve. We are on a significant ascent at this point. So our 22-23 next year's projected enrollment, and just kind of a little bit of perspective as I talk about that ascent, our pre-K through 12th grade enrollment, the projection for this current year was 4,052. As of October 1st, our enrollment was 4,145, almost 100 above the projection already. And we are above, or basically at next year's projection back on October 1st. But you may remember me saying earlier on that we provide education for 4,247 kids. That shows you the acceleration that we are on. And again, this does not include our open choice students. We are very selective about where we add open choice students, where there are openings. They add to the diversity of our community. There are students that we take from open choice program through New Haven, and we receive $3,000 per student for that in revenue. And that's applied to activities we use to basically diversify and enrich our student experience. We this year have a former actually CHS graduate, a black male who is entering a program the state provides as an alternate route to certification. And so we're paying for that through this project, where other districts pay for that just basically out of their operating budget. We've tried to operate around that. So our projected enrollment again for next year is, you can see October 1 enrollment, the projection, and our current. We're actually above that current already. And so, again, we're on a steep ascent. I know this slide can be difficult to read because of the size of the font, but again, or sixth grade through 6, not pre-K 6, but certainly our K-6 enrollment, because that's where NESDEC calculates that. This is SLAM now. Just about a month ago, or maybe a little bit longer, Tim, you may remember exactly, that we engaged SLAM, which is a firm locally that does enrollment work around school construction projects. They just completed that work through Sean's help and Andrew Martelli and Dan Glidden, outlining, what sort of building projects are coming online in our community, what's the birth rate, what's been the housing turnover. And so they provide these projections. For us, our K through 6 enrollment is slated to increase by 25% over the next decade. So when people ask me, why did a middle school have to come off the table with the enrollment, this is why. Even if we built a 6 through 8 middle school, we still couldn't accommodate the substantial growth we're expected to receive in the next decade. And so this is a pressing issue for another meeting with respect to school size capacity at the elementary schools. So the driving factors, again, in our budget, climbing enrollment and medical benefits through the council's actions. The medical benefits, that issue is not quite as pressing now, having that money infused into our operating budget. But climbing enrollment is still a major factor. So when you look at, just generally speaking, a budget, we look to either maintain, restore, or advance. Cutting our budget in the face of substantial enrollment increases would probably be irresponsible after that 5-year window where our budget was about as lean as we could get and maintain the programming that is expected of us in our community. So we look at maintain, restore, and advance. This budget, to be frank, and I have taken some criticism from the board about the fact that there wasn't more effort to advance this budget, but having that history in place and coming out of the pandemic, understanding the budget constraints, we are proposing a budget that basically maintains services. And when I say maintain, that might mean with hundreds of new students, literally hundreds of new students, we have to add staff to maintain the ratios that we've had in the past. An addition of staff is not an advancement of our program, it's a maintenance under these circumstances. So let's try and take a little bit of a walk through what the Board of Education ultimately approved. So after the adjustment to our medical benefits account through the council, our 21-2 budget was $78,501,052. The total increase is about $2.6 million for a percentage increase of 3.33. So, I talk about advancement of our budget. These are some of the areas where we would consider, when I told you what our initial budget was from our administrators, and we spend a lot of time working through how do we advance our school system. These are some of the things that we were looking at that you won't see necessarily included in our budget, or not necessarily, just not included. So in terms of our budget highlights, we were really seeking, as I said, in the face of growing enrollment, to maintain class sizes, maintain our special education services. Our discretionary accounts are flat in spite of the enrollment increase. It's not a space that we can look for reduction. And then we're looking for medical benefits funding matching the expected claims for next year. The restoration was a moderate increase to maintenance to address building and equipment issues. So by budget element here, really what we're looking at is a fairly strict contractual adjustment. And do that. That's 80% of the increase in our budget is related to our contract increases, whether it be transportation, maintenance, teaching staff, our bargaining units, et cetera. Medical benefits, another substantial portion. And I'm sorry that medical benefits thing is a little askew on this, maybe when I downloaded it to Apple, but and then restoration is at 111,000, a very small fraction of 81 million, but it addresses some maintenance lines that have been more significantly reduced that we're trying to restore a little. So request by category of the $81 million budget, 80% is for salaries and benefits. We invest heavily in the people that are in front of our kids every day. That's where our money is spent. The ratio of students to staff is competitive with other districts, as you'll see. For example, our central office ratio of students to central office employees is second lowest in the state. So we put all of our money, as much as we can, in front of our kids in classrooms and school buildings. And that's reflected in our budget, 80% of that going to salary and benefits of people that work with us and with our kids. Social support services, including transportation, roughly 9% of our budget. Instructional expenses, relatively fractional amount. And then maintenance and operations is always kind of the area when we're trying to operate super lean that is not in front of our kids. No wall has ever educated our children. So that's an area that we have had to lean on, which again underscores why the school building project is so essential. But again, that's a different meeting for another day. 22, 23, these are our highest line item increases that you'll see in our budget. The contractual salary increase is 1.23% for our teachers. Of course, as I indicated with our enrollment increases, we have had to add new positions, which is why you see that, and I'll kind of articulate in a moment where those positions are. Medical benefits, substantial part of the increase, and as I indicated, building and maintenance repair, rather, nominal increase. I'm not sure I need to necessarily talk you through this, but this is a visual representation, basically, of what I was just sharing with you. So here's where, these positions change. And if you bear with me for a second, I need to get a sheet of paper because I can't read it from here. I hate to think that it's getting close to glasses time. Would never admit that, I guess. But, see, Ben, can you read that off there, please? Thank you.
Top section of the chart, what that shows all the way over to the right, the total staff count is 113 teachers. The column right below that shows 2,118 students. This is grades K through 6. So the average class size is 18.7. That's this current year. The projection for 22-23 in the lower section is 116 teachers. So we're going up 3 teachers because we're going up to 2,190 students. And that red circle, 18.9 students per class. So the class size, average class size is going up to 10. But we're trying to hold at that, 18 to 19 student per class count in grades K through 6.
I appreciate it there, my spectacled friend. I think that a natural question that arises from what Vin just shared with you is, but wait, isn't our enrollment already beyond what's on here? It is. And one of the things that we negotiate every August is, where are we today? Because, people don't sign 5-year school contracts to come to attend our schools. Like they can move. They move in, they move out. And so what we'll be looking at is come August, and I know the track because we're already on it, that we might have to look at classrooms and add a section here or there based on our enrollment. And I've shared with you guys in years past, those of you that I've had the benefit of speaking to, that when you lose 40 kids in a year, you don't lose them all from the same classroom. It doesn't work that way. You lose it across 13 grade levels from K to 12 and different buildings and things like that. It doesn't equate to you lose 25 kids, you add a teacher. The same inverse is true. If we gain 25 students, doesn't mean we add a teacher. It really depends where those students enroll, what grade they're in, how many, what sort of space do we have available there already. So I just want to bring that up because yes, we're conscious of it. Yes, we monitor it, and yes, we adjust, because I've been at PTO meetings in the last 2 weeks where, our parents are concerned about that, given the spike in enrollment. Like, hey, what does that mean for our class sizes? Well, eventually we run out of rooms, and then we'd be looking at trailers and teachers on carts and stuff. But we do try and preserve the ratio in the neighborhood of where we've historically been. And I think that gives great assurance for our families. So this outlines district wide, K through 6, and then 7-8. And what you'll see here is, Vin articulated that next year, this year, our ratio at K6 is 18.7. Next year, it moves to 18.9. When you look at the history there, relative in our proposed budget, it's the highest it has been over the last, 8 years, roughly? 8 years, yeah. So the ratio is as high as it's been in 8 years. So when I talk about maintain and being fiscally responsible, I think we're on the upper end of where we're going to be, knowing that this enrollment is lower than what I have in the building today across the district. In grades 7 and 8, we're on the high end of where we want to be in grade 7. To be honest, grade 8, we're on the lower end. And so when we talk about monitoring enrollment and making adjustments, really it's about early August that we have to pull the trigger if we're going to do something, if we're going to change something. But that 7th grade at 26.3 is higher than we'd like. It's higher than typical, but it's like right on the cusp. Because in middle school, given the team format there, adding a teacher in a team situation doesn't really work. You kind of have to have two that are diverse in their background to be able to accommodate like a half team. And so we'll continue to monitor that. But when I talk about being fiscally responsible and being really on the threshold of where we can go, this is another point illustrative of that fact. So our CPS class size trend data, you see the elementary, just kind of line graph visually represented there. It's the same data that you were just looking at, but with just a visual representation. And then, there's going to be some normal fluctuation in there. But again, in maintaining, this is what we try and maintain what we've historically been able to navigate and what has historically benefited our students in the community. Where does Cheshire High School stand? We rank 14th of 21 DIRG B high schools in the number of students per teacher. The low end there is 12.29 students per teacher, and the high is 16.88. We're at 15.15, and that's inclusive of every certified staff member who works at Cheshire High School. So that's why high school staffing ratios kind of look askew a little bit, big buildings. So these are the recommended net staffing changes when we talk about increasing enrollment and we're talking about adding hundreds of kids, right? But really only 3.5 classroom teachers for that, because we're very strategic about where those people are placed to balance those ratios. A teacher at Chapman, Highland, and Norton, 1 classroom teacher in each of those buildings. Given the number of sections that we now have, we do need to increase music by 0.5. And we do things creatively sometimes by adding a section to a teacher to pay like overtime, an additional section. And we'll pay them to do that. If we don't have people available to do that, then or the number gets too high. Like we can't do that with half-time person. Somebody can't work 1.5 times in the course of how our schedules fluctuate. So we had to add a half position there. Now Darcy is a little bit unique in the sense that we've had in the Birth to 3 program very high demand. And if you are familiar with SLAM's or formerly SLR's enrollment, you look at the birth rates, and our birth rates have risen over the last 6 years. There's more business for Birth to 3. And in that fact, we see that need for service being higher. We hire somebody a half time, but that's not necessarily a Cheshire Public Schools program. We are a state program in the Birth to 3. Everything is billable back to the state, which offsets the cost to us. So, that's really a halftime addition that's paid for, but it has to show up in our operating budget, but the revenue comes back offsetting that cost. Then finally, the last item, you might consider an advancement or an add-on because we didn't have a transition coordinator at the 18 to 21-year-old level. What that is somebody who coordinates all of the work placement, the evaluations for students that receive specialized services, leave Cheshire High School at usually 18, 19 years old. They'll go to various programs that we have. One of them is at Quinnipiac University, for example, a transition program. Another one, we operate out of the Yellow House, providing life skills job training. Now, the reason that the demand raised to add that was that it was always considered 18 to 21-year-old service. There was a ruling issued back in the late spring, I think, of last year that was an interpretation of 18 to 21 means 18 until your 22nd birthday. So if you're talking about 18 to 21 being 3 years, we just added a 4th year of kids to that group. And so that impacted us substantially. It reached a tipping point where we really need individual coordinating that work, where we were, had spread it thin before and got it done, but adding a third to the program put us over the top there. So our projected revenue, I mentioned the Birth to 3 program, that comes in at about $400,000 is our projection for next year. I think that's a safe projection. I wouldn't be shocked to see it higher than that, adding staff. But again, there's the cost of the half staff, but the demand there has been very high. Our ECS grant is settled at $9.3 million. Our special ed excess cost grant, there's always efforts from communities to make the pie for excess cost for special education larger. There's a formula that the state is supposed to use to reimburse districts for students who come in at 3.5 times over the per pupil expenditure. But that's never followed because the piece of pie is not large enough. So you receive a fractional amount of what you're supposed to receive. We're looking at about $500,000 in terms of that number next year. Magnet schools, we do get transportation reimbursement on that. Private school health services, St. Bridget's being our chief revenue source there. And that's through the state, I believe, reimburses us. And then, of course, Smart Start tuition has been wildly popular. That's a pre-K program that we run with a sliding scale fee for service there. That's grant funded by the state at $150,000 a year. and then adult education grants and, a small amount of revenue in building rentals. So I mentioned the 2.2 million through COVID-19 grant funding. This illustrates kind of what I articulated for you earlier, and that, a lot of that money has been spent for the mitigation strategies that we employed to be able to provide full day K through 8 education last year. One of the few communities that was able to do that without interruption. The entire school year, we canceled one school day due to COVID last year, and that was in one building. It was Highland. As a matter of fact, I think I was in a school modernization meeting at the time. I got called away. It was like 9:00 at night, and it was like the third day of school, and one of our intraday cleaners, who nobody really knew, and she didn't know anybody else at that point, was positive, and she couldn't tell us who she'd been around. So at 9:00, I had to cancel school the next day for that one building only, and that was the only day that we canceled all last year. So I think we're smart in how we leverage these resources, and it has been a benefit to our community. And our Bounce Forward plan, I will send that on to Sean that he can share with you. It's definitely on our website. I know we've talked about it. We didn't want to bounce back. What we decided was that $1 million over the course of 4 years, I could hire maybe a handful of social workers or reading people. And then after the money runs out, I either have a fiscal cliff that I have to hire on these people, or they've benefited a limited number of kids over the course of that time. So what we did was more of a hybrid approach. We did hire some people, limited again, to support student needs on the back end of a pandemic, where we had a lot of kids. Certainly nobody was in school in 2020, but a number of students remote last year, and then a lot of missed time, frankly, last year with COVID isolations and quarantines. We have really emphasized professional development, and our belief is that if we can invest in our people and make our people raise the capacity level of everybody in our organization, when the money runs out, they will benefit all 4,000 students in our school system in perpetuity for the length of time they work in our community. So that's really been our emphasis with that Bounce Forward, and that's where that term comes from, that we're looking to improve to get better at what we do and have a perpetual benefit for the kids in our community. So I'll ask Sean if you wouldn't mind to forward that on to you so you have that background too. This sounds eerily familiar. This is what I was just talking about. Obviously, you can kind of see where those relatively limited staff adjustments were made across the district. We didn't get, the money that some communities received. If we received like $30 million or something, we'd be having a different conversation. But with the money that we received, we felt like this was and when I say we, I don't mean just our administrative team, but the Board of Education fully endorsed this plan too. So we're all on board. It's been working really well for us so far. We're in year 1 of this plan. So Durg B, again, just kind of a snapshot of other school systems. I mentioned where we rank in Durg B with respect to per pupil spending. You can kind of see where we are there. Nevertheless, I think we represent a tremendous value. We have record high student achievement. You saw where we ranked in Durg B. There are, I think, 8 districts in Durg A. We would finish middle of the pack in Durg A. That's people like New Canaan that spend insanely more money than we do per student. So we finished 5th in Connecticut with respect to our standardized testing performance. And the best part of it is when you go back to second slide that talked about the intersection of complex thinking and social emotional learning, we don't teach test success. We teach kids to be creative problem solvers, to be analytical, to have the capacity to be successful on authentic tasks. And in doing so, they're good at other things too, like being able to figure out tests. Now, the tests aren't like the tests that I took as a kid. The tests are super hard and do require our kids to engage in those skills of problem solving and figuring things out. And our kids do exceptionally well in that respect. We have multiple schools as Connecticut Schools of Distinction. Just recently, Norton was named a National Blue Ribbon School for their growth. Not necessarily their achievement, but their growth as well. So that was something we're really proud of. Our kids demonstrate a lot of growth year over year. Annually, we're recognized as one of the top communities for music in America. Over 93% of our kids participate in extracurricular activities. So you think back to that slide, it talked about what we provide for our kids is more than just the academic experience. I know all of you, when you think back about high school, only remember the math lecture you attended, but a lot of our kids, they love music and art and cheerleading. All those things are so critical for their development as people. And we don't graduate transcripts, we graduate people. So all those things are important, like that 93% student participation in extracurricular activities. And then, of course, winning the athletics cup, Michael's Cup, is really pretty awesome. Not a lot of districts do that on a regular basis, but combination of sportsmanship, winning, and character, we are regular people on that list. Again, the excellent value. We were the first Connecticut elementary school named a Special Olympics champion school at Highland. We have the highest ranking in niche history for the district. Our previous high was like 438 or something like that. This year we rolled in at 388. I don't put a ton of credence in that, to be honest with you. I don't think it really reflects always the quality of the work being done in a district, but I do know that people do pay attention to that when they're looking where to move. So I report it out here. Best Buddies, top Best Buddies chapter in the USA and in Connecticut. We've won both of those awards over the years. National Association for the Education of Young Children at Darcy. Excuse me for that, earned as of today. That was back in January. Neglected to edit that out. My apologies. But we can celebrate like it was today. Anyway. And I just want to remind you that an investment in our schools is an investment in our community. I say with all due respect that people don't move here for the nightlife. So many people buy homes in our community because they want their kids to get a great education. It's also a safe community to live in, obviously. I think with our friends Sean and Andrew and their leadership and your leadership, it is becoming also a little bit better for the nightlife. Nice work there, guys. But, again, I think education is still an anchor for our community. It's the bedrock of our community. And, it's important that we continue to invest in maintaining that asset that we have. So, obviously 3 different ways to invest in our school system. Tonight, we're here to talk about the operating budget. I know we'll talk about the capital budget as well and how that ties together with school modernization. And I just want to thank, in particular, this group in front of me this evening on the town council, because I've been an employee of the Cheshire Public School System for 17 years. And I've been superintendent for 6 years. And I really honestly believe that this group in front of us today has been the most invested in really trying to make sure that all 3 of these bases are covered to the best of your ability. I really believe, in partnership with the Board of Education, that partnership has been the big word there. And that we all have a vested interest in protecting that investment in our community and our kids and our schools. And I certainly respect the fact that you have to balance the needs of our school system with the other needs that are equally as important across our community. I want to acknowledge that and the other folks that have presented before you. But I just want to also say thank you for the genuine investment and time you showed in the school system. So key takeaways from this evening: budget's driven by climbing enrollment and medical benefits. I mean, that's 43% of our budget increase right there. We're recommending funding benefits at the projected rate and when I say benefits, I mean the medical benefits at the projected rate. And that's a strategy that Sean and Jim Jascott and Vin and I have been working through. It can be alluring to see a relative nest egg sitting there, but it seems to always come back and bite us. And Tim, I know you've mentioned that on more than one occasion, that's kind of a bugaboo when it gets too lean or too high. The remaining 57% of our budget increase is grounded in preserving current service levels. I think we represent an outstanding value for our community. And COVID-19 is still a real factor for us. I think it's awesome to be here and presenting this budget in person and to have a maskless audience. But the residual effects are still there of kids that missed more days than they ever have. I mean, in the classroom, I think we did everything we possibly could to keep quarantine kids connected to learning remotely and whatnot, but there's still a residual impact here. And so, with that, I say thank you. And I know Vin and I would be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you, Dr. Solon. I appreciate that. It's great to see when we get to the budget time, a lot of it is dollars and cents. It's nice to see some of the color that was added and really a reminder of some of the great accomplishments that you and your team with the Board of Ed, you and your team at the Department of Education have done. We do have you do run a showplace. I mean, we really have educationally very, very sound. We have an awful lot to show for that. And you do it on a shoestring. I'll admit you're not the most well-funded school system. But with that being said, I do want to get into some questions if I can. And really what I want to look for is some updates because your budget was adopted a long time ago. And I'm sure things like teacher retirements, maybe there's some new updates on that. Medical benefits, I'm sure there is, because you've got 3 different months of history. Plus, you've also had some recent, reviews with your medical benefits advisor. I know the town has on our side. I'm sure you have on your side as well. So we get some updates. Is that what you're passing out, or is?
The first item that we passed out
okay.
is just a copy of the slideshow.
Oh, great. Thank you. Good.
Okay. I will send Sean the digital copy of this that's a little easier on the eyes and the bounce forward plan as well. What Vin is distributing now is our medical benefits update.
Okay. 2 more of these. Yeah, 1 more.
Okay, it's out this way. Do you have enough of them, or? Yeah. Don't take 2. There aren't extras. As we know when it gets to the end. Yeah, I think it's something different. Oh, these there are more of. Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, perfect.
I thought these are all the same, right?
That's that right. You got to. Oh, I guess he had extras he gave to them. Okay, and then this is a different one.
I thought it was just a 1 sheet again.
That's a 1-sheeter. Yeah. That didn't sound too. All right. It's temperamental,
There
as
we
you
go.
know.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Thank you.
Thank
being
you for
here.
having us. So I will start with an update on medical benefits, and let me just set the stage a little bit with respect to our medical benefits request. The medical benefits budget for this fiscal year is $11,080,441. The request is $11,816,074. So that's an increase of $735,000. 6.64% is the increase. So this has been adjusted based on the town council increasing the current year budget by $1.5 million. The $11,816,000 requested is grounded in what our benefits consultant believes the claims run rate will be for fiscal year 22-23. And so this budget request essentially, assuming the actuarial assumptions are correct, our contributions and our claims will be equalized, so we won't be eroding any medical benefits reserve balance that we have. That's the goal of the current budget as requested. In the budget book on the medical benefits, there's a reconciliation of how we actually get to that budget, because the cost of medical benefits is offset by contributions we receive from our employees who pay towards their medical benefits.
Where is that in there? So we can.
So if you
follow
go to the budget book under the section called Employee Benefits, and then it's page 2.
There we go, page 2. Okay.
So on the lower right-hand side, right, so that page has a graph on it. So on the lower right-hand side, in the column where it says 2022, 23, I'll just walk you through this very, very quickly. So the funding for claims, these are the actual medical benefit claims we expect. $1 million a month, $12 million. We have to pay to buy stop-loss insurance to cover us for large claims. That's $1.1 million. We're expecting that to go up 15%. Employee HSA contributions. The employees that participate in our HSA plan, we provide funding towards their HSA account, $668,000. Administrative fees, we pay to Cigna for medical, dental, prescription plan, $300,000. Employee waivers, there are certain groups of employees that if they waive medical insurance, we give them a payment of $1,000 or $1,200. And then we have $8,203 budgeted for employee assistance. So if you take that cost, in total, it's $14,163,479. And that gets offset by the employee co-share, right? Employees, as they're essentially paying for a portion of their medical benefits. It ranges anywhere from 12 to 20%. That's that $1,847,000. So that reduces the total cost. And then we do expect about $500,000 of stop-loss reimbursement against that 1.1 million in premiums we're paying. The 500,000 is the average that we've been seeing over the years. And so if you net that out, 11,816,074, that's how we arrived at our budget. So here's the update, and I'm going to take a look first at this sheet that says medical benefits update final as of February 28, 2022. Up in the top section, you'll see that the reserve balance we started this year was $924,908. Then $1.5 million was added by the council. Against that, in the left side, the top section, contributions that come from our operating budget that go into the reserve on a year-to-date basis of $6.5 million. This year so far, we've received $370,000 in stop-loss reimbursements for high claims, and stop-loss claim is anything above $175,000 for an individual member. Prescription rebates that we received from Cigna, $251,000, and then interest and other adjustments, $326,000. So incoming was $7,505,779. Okay, so that's the good part. The claims, you could see from July through February of 2022, we started the claim year relatively high, 1,143,000. We were expecting actuarially about $900,000 per month. So we saw very, very high claims, and that continued through December. You know, the good news here is that when we hit January, the new HSA plan year began. Our claims did drop below the expected level, down to 843,000 in January, and then 745,000 in February. So if you take the sum total of what we started with plus what was added minus the claims, you know, down in the bottom of this top section, you'll see that the medical benefits reserve balance as of February is 1,461,193. That gives us about 1.62 months worth of reserves. So at this point, the last couple of months, we've been holding with the reserve balance. The fact that we receive stop loss payments, we receive prescription rebates, helps buoy the balance. So I would say that we're okay right now. Obviously, we have, you know, March through June to go in terms of claims. I do expect claims to uptick a bit, but hopefully not back to the levels that they were. We did meet with the budget committee. I know, you know, the budget committee, when we met, I believe it was back in January, we did give a lot more detail about what we're seeing in terms of claims. You know, we're seeing high claims, but not hitting that $175,000 threshold. There's a variety of different things that, or illnesses and disease that people have, unfortunately. But whether or not it's related exactly to COVID or not, it's an unknown at this point. But if that does subside and we start hitting that $900,000 per month normalized level that we were expected, we should end the year with a reserve balance. And then assuming, you know, this funding is approved for next year, claims are running $1 million a month, we should sustain our reserve balance. My point is, we're not trying through this budget to build a larger reserve. We're just trying to make sure that the contributions we make will be in line with the claims that we receive.
Did you just get I know we just got an update, the finance director and town manager, the last couple of weeks or so working with that. Do you have whatever the latest update is as to what they're recommending you put for a monthly?
You're talking about the recommendation from USI? Yeah, and that, yes. And that is in line with what we budgeted.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about $1 million a month is what we're budgeting for claims. That is in line with what we're receiving from USI. USI, again, is our benefits consultant.
Mm-hmm.
They keep updating the projection for next year because they're looking at a rolling 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we have another couple of months, you know, March and April claims before, you know, that's really narrowed down a bit more.
Well, because, I mean, quite frankly, I don't think I'm speaking out of school, Sean. They told us our numbers are going to be somewhat significantly less with the update.
Well,
And I'm kind of surprised that they're not seeing some kind of a trend.
so part of the reason that we're not quite equalized is because the budget that we were carrying for last year
Mhm.
was not 900,000.
Right.
We had $815,000
Right.
per month. So the point is, we need to get to the $12 million to equate what USI is recommending for a funding level. And that's where we are with this budget.
So you're saying their recommended number has not changed from December when you got the one that the board adopted in January till now?
It hasn't
Okay.
changed by much, no.
All right. So that's still the $1 million, and that's what you budgeted,
Correct.
which will leave you the fund balance roughly what we put into it, $5 million, if all comes in right, which is what we want. All right. I don't think we want to fall into the trap of budgeting a little bit less to save some money and then find out we have some problems. I don't think any of us have talked about that. We want to fund to the level that we need to fund to, but we don't want to fund over that either. And maybe with another month of claims in the next week or so, you'll get the numbers next week for March, hopefully, or after at the latest. and we've got till the end of the month to adopt. That might change the trajectory slightly, but all right.
I wouldn't expect it to change much,
Yeah,
but because, again, I'm kind of familiar with where we've been running the last couple
Yeah.
of years.
yeah.
So, 1 month drops off, 1 month gets added
Right.
on.
Yeah, that's
I don't think it's going to help us substantially.
Yeah. I'm gonna see if, since this medical benefits is in and of itself a topic, let's see who else has questions just regarding this, and then we'll go to more updates. Mr. Slocum?
Question, a comment. I guess because the town has many employees, many work in the school system and others work in the others, public sector. And this is really one object in both budgets. Would it be beneficial, maybe Jim, this is the question for Jim and Sean, if we looked at this holistically, the town has a budget that pays for medical expenses, we have contributions, and then somehow it's distributed proportionally across the board. So nobody's in a surplus or a loss. It's all, we're not cutting the town side or using the town side, but it's just one big object that we finance around. Is that not a simpler way, at least to begin modeling how we pay for this and fund it correctly? I mean, the town's running a surplus, so to speak. We've over-collected, I assumed, and underclaimed. The board has done much differently than that. But in the end, it's still taxpayer dollars. And we want to use some of the town's surplus, I would think, to buttress the board's problem. I mean, isn't that the way we could look at this, even if it's just a model that's taken place in the finance office, so that we could do a comparative analysis of what's really going on? Is that how the insurance companies look at this, or do they look at it as two separate objects?
I would answer this way as a start, that I think if you look at it from the town's financial point of view, the reserve balance is the reserve balance.
Right.
That's commingled. The reason we want to account for it separately is so that we look at our individual performance. And the other factor that I think is important to mention is, as I just walked through, for the Board of Ed employees, and plans are different, not only within the Board of Ed, but across on the town side. So because we have Board of Ed employees contributing towards their medical benefits, and that does have an impact plus or minus on the reserve, that's why I think you would want to account for them separately so that we don't intermingle employee contributions on the board side with the town side.
And I guess I intrinsically understand that. Obviously, you got your budget, we've got our budget on this side. But when there's an excess, so to speak, say the town has the excess on their side, and there is the temptation to use that excess, and there will be, to relieve some of our burdens in public works or whatever it might be, just to call out a good example, a bad example. Is there a way to capture those funds so that they stay in the reserve fund, so they stay in the medical problem?
One way to look at it, to go with what Vin was saying with the different sides, one way to look at it is if the general town government side has a bit of a surplus, why not under budget for the general town government side?
Well, that's a way to do that.
That's one way of looking at it.
But also have a stop loss
But
in
know
that.
that the money is there as a stop loss from that could help either side if there was an emergency for 1 year. But the idea of commingling money is significant, but not an end all to be all. If they both pay under 20% of it, 80% of it is not, paid for by the employees. But maybe one way we need to look at, and one of the questions I asked Jim and Sean this morning when we were going over some draft information I want to try to get ready for Thursday, is what can we do on the general town government side to maybe not fund as much as we were budgeted in the presentation that we received and in the town manager budget. So I guess, I don't know if that softened the blow to get you ready to answer what you want to say, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly understand, what Tim is saying. I think I would echo what Vin said about there's sort of the higher level view of it, and then there's sort of a middle tier, not quite in the weeds. But Yeah, certainly from the balance sheet standpoint, you know, you're looking at a shared fund and a shared effort on both sides of the street and whatnot. You know, I do, and I've said this before. There are some, there are some concerns around the separate funds, the wellness programs we've put into place, the various contracts that you have with the unions that you'd want to make sure, from the union's perspective, certainly with the funds they are putting in, are we putting in equal share in some of those things so that they're contributing equally to the pot? And then, so those are considerations that certainly we would have shared no matter who had a surplus one year versus the other. So I think it is important to track. And again, as we negotiate these contracts, often as new plans are put in, you're selling the benefit of the plan, the high deductible health plan, as overall, if we can save money for our organization, for your unit, you'll kind of share in some of that savings going forward with lower rates. So I think that's one concern that I would put forward, but certainly from the balance sheet standpoint, as we've said before, it's a larger shared pool. And certainly I think to what Mr. Borrowy said, there's opportunities to use some of that funding in maybe other ways, but this more of a backstop, but not maybe a dollar for dollar transfer, if that's what you're
And I
referring
see
to.
that. I recognize that, but maybe there has to be some built-in discipline where we actually say, well, employees on the town side didn't get to the benefit levels that we thought we may, but we can only grab this much. In other words, there's only so much we can, as a best practice, if you will, take to underfund it for the next year you know nothing about. I guess that's what's always been the issue with this.
Mhm.
We overestimate and we underperform all the time. And I think that's gotten us into a number of traps that we're all aware of, and we're always coming up with a bailout plan, although the federal government came out with this one for us at the state. But that's not going to last.
As long as they don't all happen at the same time, every time they.
Right, and I know the town was in a similar picture, even though the numbers were much smaller a number of years ago. We were in a very dark sort of situation ourselves. It just didn't have the magnitude, that can happen on your side.
right,
with the
so,
number
I
of
mean-
employees.
I did distribute this,
Mhm.
and I guess it's worth it to just at least walk through very quickly the trap that we do find ourselves in that Tim was mentioning. So this is the medical benefits funding history, just for the board side, going back to 2012-13. And there's a lot of math here, but I'll just direct your attention to the two columns on the far right. Starting with the ending reserve fund balance on the far right. So you could see that in 2013, our fund balance was 2 million. Then it dropped down to 628,000, then 749. And then for the next, 4 years, it started to build up significantly. The column next to that shows the net difference between what we were contributing and what our claims were. So the reason the fund balance in those first 2 years dropped the way it did is because claims were higher than contributions. As that fund balance started to build up, we fall into the temptation that, well, we can underfund it next year a little bit. And so after we hit the 4 million, we started to fund less in contributions than expected claims. And it worked okay for the first year, but then actually it worked okay the first year, 2018-19, 2019-20, but then 2020-21, we got walloped with claims, and that's kind of typical to what happened. And then the fund balance really got hit hard. And so because we've been funding lower than expected claims, now you have to really increase your operating budget to the point of pain. And that's what happened, with us over the last 2 years. So the only way to avoid that, it creates another problem, but the only way to avoid that is every year we fund our contributions based on what the actuarial claims are expected. And so some years you're going to start seeing not high spikes, but I think consistently year over year, you're going to be increasing that 4 to 5%. The good news is if you do that every year, you'll never have to see us ask for a 20% increase, but now you may wind up with a large reserve balance, which you can then redeploy as a council. But
you ever put a cap on that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what
Agreed.
I think we have to do as a policy, not
Yeah.
only just fund the claims that are expected, but also put a governor on what
sure,
the governors can do.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that before, that discipline, and I thought when you mentioned that, this is what you were talking about, like, because we had kicked around internally, all right, what's the threshold there? Is it once you get in excess of 4 months claims at the end of that year, the difference between 4 months claims and whatever money you have can be deposited, but no more.
Yeah, I think you
You
have
know,
to set
something
some
like
kind of
that.
floor for what you can take.
Exactly. And so that sort of, I thought when you were talking about discipline, that was the framework I had in my mind. And I think, Vin's point is a good one in the sense that, it smooths out what annual differences in the contribution would look like. I mean, it's gonna have a more predictable path as opposed to, being in positions where like, oh my gosh, we've depleted that balance down so low that we have to come up with a big number. And when we get to a point where it's a big number add in a year that's not great financially, that's really going to sting. And we've done that sometimes over, in the last 20 years. I think we're all looking to avoid that. And what makes the most sense, I think what you're talking about makes a lot of sense in that respect.
Well, if we can have the discipline, but if we can sort of put it into a principle, a sheet of
Kind of
paper.
codify
somewhere.
it a little bit,
Yeah, I think if within reason, we should work off a benchmark plan that we start this year based on failures.
Thank you. Other comments regarding this topic, Mr. Malone?
I am a little confused. By the way, first of all, I do want to echo, David, what you said earlier, that the school system is run really well, and we're very appreciative of it. I know people that have moved to this community because they were attracted by the school system, and they're very, very happy that they've done so, and it's just a wonderful thing. So thank you both very much. We all really appreciate it. I am a little confused by this. I don't think it's a big deal, but I'm just, if we're going up, if we're budgeting 11% increase, it means we're at 900,000 per month. But now you're saying we were at 815 or something per month. So I don't know, where did we go from 815 to 900? And how did, and I just want to be comfortable when we do this, that we're not overreacting to some unusually high claim months, because it seems to me maybe we're just kind of overreacting to this because we're a little nervous that they might continue. That's my sense. Anyway, but where did we go from 815 to 900 and now to a million, 11% increase? I don't understand that.
so the 900,000 per month was what was expected, John.
Okay.
But that's not the budget that we had. We budgeted 815,000 per month. So it was purposely under budgeted.
Mhm.
So we have to make up that $85,000 per month difference, plus get to the expected run rate for next year, going from 900,000 a month to 1 million per month. A simpler way to explain it is we're going from 815,000 we budgeted to $1 million per month, because the claims, that's what they're expected to be.
So it's not 11% increase, it's much higher.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that
The
make
expected
sense?
claim rate is going up 11%. The expected claim rate is 900. Now they're saying 1 million. The reason we budgeted 85,000 less per month was we were going to spend down some of the surplus that was in there, giving them that special $1.5 million directly from ARPA funds to here. But we ended up making a logistical change to it, accounting change to it recently.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then one other question, and this may just be something that I don't, let me see where it was here. Hold on just a second. Employee assistance and wellness, there's a small number there. I assume that there's a lot more money being spent on wellness than the $8,000.
Yeah, there is. That's just funding that we have for Deer Oaks is an employee assistance plan that we, pay for our employees, that provides assistance when they need it.
Mhm.
But from part of our deal with Cigna
Mhm.
includes a $40,000 annual wellness fund that is shared with the town. On top of that, Cigna provides a health coach, which is a registered nurse that is on site 3 days per week. So it's the combination of those things that we use for wellness. And that's, direct funding. Cigna on its own, as the healthcare provider, has initiatives within its program to encourage employee wellness, hypertension, pre-diabetes management, diabetes management. There's all types of outreach that Cigna does that I wouldn't consider our wellness funds. That's just what Cigna is trying to do with its own member base.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, I was assuming that was the case, but that's so important. Thank you.
We're currently in both a walking and weight loss challenge in the district that is funded with prizes through Cigna.
Okay, they're good. It's good for them too. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Good, yeah. Just a quick question. Did you want to ask it? Okay, new employees that are added, because you're going to add a few, this year to meet the enrollment. Are they factored into this? That roughly $1 million a month?
Yes.
Okay, so it's so much per person, more or less, and if you add more people to the size of the population, then you're increasing that. That wasn't the cause of the shortage.
no.
Okay.
But I assume most of unlike the town side, the majority of your employees take the medical, or what percentage of your employees take the medical?
That's a good question, and I have to think it through. I'm not sure that I have the answer. Well, maybe I do, because we have about 500 employees enrolled. Now, we have a total of roughly 700 full-time employees. So 5/7 is the round number as I sit here. It's not 100%, and, it's not a low number either.
No. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sure.
I didn't, Jim will understand this. I'm not the math whiz. That wasn't one of my strong subjects. But I mean, just go back to this claim thing that Jim was talking about and having a cap at the amount of money that you want to keep in the reserve amount. It helped me to understand if I'm reading this right. If I go back to 2017, 18, we had $4 million left in that. And then the following months, we undervalued. If we had left that in there and funded directly, we would have had enough to fund the $3,194,000 worth of claims this year, correct? So that level of that, so where do you put that stop that says when is too much in that reserve fund? And I agree with what you're saying is maybe there should be a cap, but if we hadn't shortened the claims, we would have easily been able to manage this claim. Am I correct in
Yeah,
that
you're right.
assumption? Okay, I have to put all the pennies. in
So,
the
I mean,
piles.
one way to, and we could do some more analysis on this, obviously, but, when we were looking at that $4 million claim balance, we always measured a number of claims months in reserve. So when you get to, we could pick a number, 5 months, 6 months, whatever that equates to, that's one way to start thinking about the cap. Now, obviously, it's going to adjust over time. I mean, the fact is there is medical inflation that does occur.
And
you can do it.
keep your current claim rate without you should not reduce the amount that you're taking in as expected claims because you're now breaking into that. So you
Right.
keep that
One-
level and
Exactly.
yeah.
And then anything above and beyond that,
Then that
number
comes-
that Vin
right.
just mentioned in terms of months of claims. And I think, USI could probably help us with that, rather than just going with our gut, but
And then I just have one other question, and that is because as personnel, we worked it through when we were doing contract negotiations, and I'm assuming that what we expect our employees to pay a percentage is pretty much average across the board. I mean, are we taking more than most towns do or less than most? How do we determine that when it comes to contract time?
each element within a teacher's bargaining unit, for example, contract,
Mhm.
is not, arbitrated independently. It's a
Right.
package, right?
Right.
So, in that process, and we are not that far removed from an arbitrated contract in Cheshire for teachers. They look at the entire package. So, while our rates, our insurance rates may be a little bit on the lower side, the pay would be a little bit on the lower side. It's a full package. So I think we maintain a competitive package with other towns, and that's obviously important to attract great talent. But I think it's, fiscally, we're in the ballpark of other communities. Vin, you agree with that, or anything you would add?
I mean, the bargaining units, each of the bargaining units, is close to the median across the state.
Right. And that's what we were trying to achieve, not to be
It is.
over withdrawing from people, but being fair to okay.
And one of the things actually that retained a higher level on the HSA was the contract we negotiated out this past year. We're in the first year of that contract with the teachers, I think. And there was more collaborative time built in. We adjusted, if you recall, we were really the only high school in Connecticut that had teachers teaching 6 sections. We leveraged the fact that our enrollment at the high school level was reducing and put that at 5 sections instead of 6, in line with pretty much everybody across the state, which allowed us to save with respect to the salaries and insurance.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jenks, you had a question regarding insurance? And then...
Oh, are we still in the insurance portion
Well,
of the program?
I wanted to just finish that up, but is it insurance questions? Can we
Okay.
go that, and then we'll broaden it up. All right, he's not in insurance questions, so Mr. Veliver, and then Ms. Pavano.
Thank you. And I mean, obviously, I just want to, we've been talking about this since last year, the increase in the number of claims and what's happening and how we're trying to adjust for this. And I just have and looking at the, what you have here, I found it interesting that obviously we saw as of November and December, 1.5 and 1.1 and 1.5 million dollars of claims loss. But then obviously interesting in that, when the new year starts, the numbers drop to 840,000 and 745,000. And I'm just curious. I'm sure that you and the Board of Education have done a pretty in-depth look at what those claims are and what they actually make up. And we're seeing the numbers, but you've seen what they have. So I had 2 questions. One is, are you seeing an increase in the number of claims themselves, or is it that each claim is now costing more money, or maybe a combination of both?
Well, it's a combination, really. What we're seeing more of is claims above $25,000. And that's been consistent over the last couple of years. Again, what's driving that, what the root cause of that, I don't know, but people are getting sick. And we're talking about cancer diagnosis, heart disease, diabetes. Some of it is high cost birth, right? That, premature, births are expensive. So things like that are up. Bone, hip, joint, and those types of disorders. Some of that may be people, during the pandemic decided that they were going to get, their knees replaced or their hips replaced. That's a reality of what might be happening. So yes, we do track it. It's obviously after the fact.
Right.
And then we have some people that are, very seriously ill, long-term cancer, immunotherapies. Those are high cost claims that those continue on. Those typically, though, do hit that $175,000 stop loss limit. And so we get some reimbursement against that. The other thing, and it's not a significant factor in the scheme of the claims that we have here for the Board of Ed, but, the COVID costs, we do get a report from Cigna on that. And we're well over $500,000 in COVID-related expenses since the pandemic started. It's not what we think. We really have had no one, either on the town or Board of Ed side, so far that has had a severe COVID hospitalization. A lot of the money went for testing. some of it for vaccines. So that does drive up the cost. Again, it's not the significant portion of the cost, but the direct COVID expense. Might there be indirect expenses that are a result of COVID that are driving some of the claims? I think the answer is yes, but can't measure that exactly.
Right. I was just curious if we're seeing that maybe, and is it a combination of both, that these things are becoming more expensive and we're seeing an increase? And just to follow up to the issue, my observation that they dropped off in January, is there any expectation that sort of the reset of the HSA, sort of basically the recreation of usually the family deductible kind of starts that year off, and maybe people don't go as much, but but by April, May, June, we might start to see people hit that, and suddenly those costs start spiking again?
That's typical, that we do see that drop January, February, March, and then start to increase back up again in April, May, June. But it was a sharp drop.
Right.
Because it was very high, a couple of claim months before that. So, what I explained to the board is, we'll report and then we cross our fingers and hope for the best when it comes to claims.
Thank
So
you.
that is some of what we do.
Exactly. Good luck. Thanks.
Having sat on the Board of Ed and been in negotiation for teachers' contracts, I just want to make a statement that I know that the Board of Education is always looking to monitor the costs and always looking for better products, maybe better, different companies. And that was one of the negotiating factors that we always looked at in trying to lessen the cost to the town. So I just want to mention to people that are watching, I know how much you always look at costs. I noticed even in your one of your other contracts, I think it was you went to another you went to Travelers on one of your contracts. What was it?
For workers' comp, we went to
Workers' comp,
Travelers.
right, that's a perfect example. You went to workers' comp, you went to another company, and it is a savings to the town of Cheshire. So I want to compliment you. I know that you're always looking for savings, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. I thought I'd ask a question about education, maybe. Are you guys okay with that? Okay. I had a comment and then I had a question. The portion of your presentation, Dr. Solon, about grants we received and how we were kind of investing that in the staff. I thought that was that sounds like a great idea, especially at least what I've been hearing. I think it's been well reported as far as teacher burnout and a lot of turnover in the teaching profession. Are we seeing that at all in Cheshire, and how concerned are you kind of going forward? Just kind of that's just a kind of a general question about where we're kind
I
of
think it
how we're
also
positioned.
may dovetail a little bit with what David had asked earlier about retirements that we're seeing. We did have a retirement incentive package back in 2020, which accelerated a number of retirements as it's designed to do, obviously. Thus far this year, I only have 2 formal retirement letters. I don't often get that. They're supposed to submit them by May 1, but when teachers submit them after May 1, I don't say no, thank you. You're coming back. Obviously, that if they'd like to do that, we accommodate that. But I think the last couple of years has been really taxing on our teachers, our administrators, pretty much everybody in society. And you see that across the board. 60 Minutes did a great article or a great piece probably about 5-6 months ago called The Great Quit, where they talked about people leaving professions. I think the last 2 years have really pushed people to the brink. And unless you really love your profession and love what you do, even sometimes when you do love those things, it can make you think about doing something different. Fortunately, we've had very few people leave the Cheshire Public Schools. Very early on last year, I think we had 2 people. Last year we had 2 people resign, and move on, or I guess earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, about with the vaccination requirements. But other than that, I can't think of anybody who's left the profession. And we try and be very sensitive to those needs and support and accommodate all of our staff. But it's been a tough time, no doubt about it.
We've had questions, Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will echo what my colleagues said earlier in their positive remarks about the Cheshire Public School System. But I'd also add this, that, you know, the past 2 years for the majority of, you can go beyond America and say the world, that it was, you know, it was a tough couple of years. But for people involved in education, it was nothing like what we went through. You guys had it so much worse. I give you a lot of credit and thank you for all the things that you did during extremely difficult times and under extremely difficult circumstances. So just that is a preamble to a couple of questions. The first is the slide you showed with per pupil expenditure. It goes along 16, 17, the difference per student between the state average and Cheshire is 900. Same in 17, 18, it's 900, 18, 19, it's 900. And then it jumps to 2,264 and then up to 2,551. So you guys Cheshire continued to get an increase. So if you look at the numbers and Cheshire continued to get the increase, is there, speaking of COVID, is there a COVID factor to that maybe we didn't capture as to why the state average jumped so dramatically in that 2 year
In that
span?
window. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is a, you know, beyond 100% change in the difference between, you know, our per pupil spending and the state average over the course of that window. But I do want to go back real quick to yours and the remarks that other people have made here, recognizing the school system tonight. I am happy, as has been, to sit here and accept those acknowledgments on behalf of the hundreds of people who really every day have gone out of their way. And I'm looking forward to be able to pass on. And when I talk about, you know, this mutual respect that we have between the council and what happens across the street, I'm looking forward to be able to pass that on tomorrow. So thank you. With respect to that jump, I think part of that was going back a few years. When we look at slides prior, actually the slide just before the per pupil expenditure slide is the historical budget expenditures. And what we saw leading up to that period was in the 4 years prior to the 2021 school year, the budget expenditure was 0.96, 0.36 increase, 2.16, and 0.66. So I think that's, you know, in the subsequent year where you see that jump is there. And yeah, I mean, I think last year was a year with a 3.23% budget increase where we took a, you know, significant step toward restoring some of the things that we had reduced in previous years. But as you see by that gulf that you mentioned, Peter, there's still a substantial difference there.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, you know, our performance continues to be exceptionally high. And it is so because I think we focused some of our federal money on providing professional development. We also, the last thing we touch is the classroom experience. And I think I showed tonight where those ratios are as high as they've ever been. further reductions really concern me about touching that, because we have cut those lines around maintenance and other things as low as we can cut, get them to ensure that the classroom experience is not, inhibited.
The second one is around the slide that's right below it, or actually 2 slides after from your presentation. And it deals with the NASDAQ report with the 10-year downturn
Yep.
and the 10-year upturn. So when you look at 2011 and you look at 2031, the outlying years, within, and I know it's not exact, but it ends up being about the same. Where we're headed is going to be where we were in 2011. So I guess, and I don't know how to frame the question, and I'm not doing this to be, but what do you say to someone who says, well, we funded you in 2011 at this level, and 2031, you're going to be back to that same enrollment.
What'd you pay for your car in 2011 is probably what I would say to them. Obviously, inflation is a real factor and everything, nobody's getting, very few people are getting paid in 2031 what they got paid in 2011. I mean, what did I pay for bread as a kid? Escalation is a real deal. It happens, and that's the market we live in.
Do you have in this, and I wasn't able to find it, and it may be in here, but I was looking at, to that point, do you have historical data with the number of teachers and number of certified staff that would point back to that, at least to that time frame?
Definitely. We in constructing this, one of the future slides on page 7 goes back to 2014 on the bottom left-hand side of page 7. That graph is illustrative of the question, what was our student per teacher ratio over history? Now that one only goes back to 2014, but I could get earlier data. I could dig around for that.
We need to move that light, Sean. Also in the certified section of the budget book on page 5, we do have a history of the teacher staffing budget changes by year. So you could see, by year, where did we reduce, where did we increase? We did try to provide some explanation where we could, like in 2009-10, staff was reduced by almost 17 positions, and 10-11 it was reduced by 14 positions. Then it kind of leveled off, and then, for example, 14-15 we added 6 classroom teachers for full day K. So there is at least a breakdown by year. You could see the net teacher staffing changes.
Thank you.
Other more broad questions, Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that presentation. That was very informative. I echo my colleagues' opinions on what a wonderful job our educators, led by you, have done during these past 2 years. It's just remarkable. I think it shows that we still have one of the best school districts in the state. And I just had a couple of questions. What Mr. Talbot was just saying, with the, and I know the answer having sat on the school modernization, but they're also going to be asking the same question about, well, why do we need bigger schools if we had that back then? And I think it might be a good opportunity for you to explain for that, because I know there's different ways of teaching and everything. But
thank you, first of all, for the acknowledgement, but then also opening the door with that question, because it is something that I get asked. I had the benefit of spending Saturday, a little plug for the Chamber of Commerce on their Home Health and Garden Show at Cheshire High School. Incredibly well attended, and it was a really nice time to engage the community. And I did get asked that question about, the size discrepancy and where is our space going, right, in the classrooms. We're not, our space, particularly at the elementary level, has been dramatically impacted by two factors. First is Mr. Massiana just mentioned, the shift from half-time kindergarten, half-day kindergarten to full-day kindergarten. We were what I guess you would consider a late adopter as a community of that plan. And what it did, and you realize the impact further today with increasing enrollment, is double the number of classrooms you need, right? Because one teacher could accommodate 2 sections before, but now with 1 section per teacher, you need twice the space to do that. That certainly impacted our elementary schools. The other marquee factor that's impacted our space is the fact that we had historically outplaced students with more unique and significant specialized needs. When we started to evaluate those needs, when we reached a point with certain needs that we had, if you will, a critical mass of kids that we were sending out of town, that comes, as we evaluated it, at great expense, not only economic expense, but personal expense to the child to send them out of town to get their education on a van. The special education transportation is very expensive. The private care is very expensive. And frankly, when we evaluated it, we thought we could do it better. And I would say every case we do when we've created in-house programs, but those are what, our Chuck from Colliers would call space-hungry programs. Our intensive education program at Highland, for instance, is a model, but it takes up space in the building, but it also provides an incredible educational experience with kids that have more intensive needs, and it's done at a much lower rate than we would pay to send kids out of town. So that's really where those 2 factors in particular have eaten a ton of space in our schools.
Thank you. I know we'll be discussing more of that.
Absolutely. Like I said, for another meeting, right?
Yeah. But I just wanted to make sure that was clarified to some people too who might not be listening later. A couple questions about revenue. The pay to play, I don't see that in the revenue source. Is that somewhere different? Is that in a different revenue source or?
No, so pay to play, you're talking about the
The
fee that we charge.
Yeah.
So that is accounted for in certified staff under our coaching salary line, which we budget net.
Okay.
And it is explained, it's page 8 in certified salaries. So we have $609,048 budgeted for student activities. So that is the net number after we account for about $150,000 in those fees that we collect for extracurricular activities, which currently are $125 per student sport.
And it doesn't matter what sport, they all pay the same, or
No,
hockey's
it
a
does.
little more?
Like ice hockey is $225. There is a $350 cap per student and a $550 cap per family. Those have remained the same since 2017, 18.
Right. Now, when, there's groups, obviously, the Gridiron Club and all that, when that donate money for specific, is that put into a separate account, or is that does that go into this account?
No, so we do have to separate these things out.
Right.
So Gridiron is its own entity,
Right.
right? And they collect dues and,
And they donate money, though, to the school to
So when
buy.
they donate money to the schools, that goes into the respective school, and it's generally Gridiron is going to be high school. High school has its student activity funds, which are separate. They're outside of the operating budget. They're only accounted for on the town side on the CAFR. Those are the fiduciary funds. Each school, under state law, is allowed to have a student activity fund, and it's typically used to collect fees. At the elementary school, it's collect fees for field trips and pay for field trips. At the high school, it's more collecting not only extracurricular activities, sports, music, etc., but it's also collecting for the yearbook, collecting for prom. Each class contributes, and that money is accounted for and held separately, so it's outside
So
of the
your
operating budget.
department doesn't oversee any of that? That's all overseen by the school in general?
Each school has its own account.
Right.
And its own bookkeeper, and
Okay.
bookkeeper and the principal have to sign all the checks. Again, it's reviewed annually as part of the audit, for example.
Right.
Right, and there are procedures that are specific to student activity accounts.
Yeah, because I think we did ask for an audit a couple years ago. That I know COVID had some issues with that, but
Well, first of all, the audit that's done by the town auditors does include student activities as part of that audit.
it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
What was discussed, pre-COVID, was a look at the, not so much an audit, but a review of the procedures
Mhm.
and how student activity works. I think there was a lot of confusion about that. Just prior to the pandemic, a presentation, was made to the Board of Education. In attendance were a number of Board of Ed members, but also the representatives from the high school, Dodd, and Highland Schools student activity accounts. So we gave a good and thorough explanation, presentation of how the student activity accounts work. And then subsequent to that, the Board of Ed did approve, with the current auditors, a separate engagement to do a review of student activity procedures. It did get held up because of the pandemic, but they did complete the field work, and actually we're waiting for the results of that review with recommendations.
All right, and thank you for that. And one last thing, because I know this is coming. We have to have a seat on the bus for every student that's in, and we pay for that seat, or it's
Well,
sort of the state.
We plan our bus routes for all the non-walker students. So we have to allow, under state law, every student has to have a seat.
Right.
However, as we go through, the school year, we do a couple of things to try and understand who's not going to be riding the bus. For example, the seniors who have a parking permit at Cheshire High School. As part of the parking permit request now, there is an opt-out of student transportation requirement that we have. We also, as the bus drivers are going through their runs, especially in the beginning of the year, if they're making a stop and there's no student, our transportation manager will contact the parent and ask if the student is not going to take transportation to opt out, so we can remove that student from the route. We always make the commitment that we will restore that student on the route within 48 hours upon request. So we do try and do that to try and reduce the number of total bus runs that we have.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
I
Yeah,
know
no,
that's
it's
a
just-
long-winded explanation.
No, I
but-
get it. I just wasn't sure because those of us who get stuck in the traffic down there. You see, the bus is leaving like with a quarter of the people in it. It's like, wow, that's. But I mean, we don't have much of a choice. That's
Especially on rainy days.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
If I could just, clarify a point, I think you know the difference, but I don't want anybody who's watching this to get confused by it. I don't want to conflate the two accounts. The money that we collect through student activity is considered revenue for the Cheshire Public Schools, and as Vin said, offsets coaching. When people engage in fundraising for their team or whatever, that money is overseen, I think, for the sake of transparency and bookkeeping through the Cheshire Public Schools, with one notable exception. That's the Gridiron Club, who is more they do their thing privately. We don't touch that money. We only facilitate that for the coach or whatever. So in that, all of the different organizations really have the same philosophy, and that is to not supplant what the school district would spend, but supplement what is provided. So if we provide one assistant coach for, say, basketball, and the parents really believe that we need to have a dedicated free throw shooting coach on staff, well, then they talk to the coach, and the coach can hire somebody. That coach now still has to go through our hiring process, but they give us the money, we pay the coach. Like I said, it's really all about supplementing through those parent donations. As a parent today, I was just working with my own son about a ball machine for tennis. The school didn't provide it. His parents were trying to do that. So that's what I just want to be clear about, that the money collected for activity fees and the money that is collected by parents, they don't mix. Two separate accounts.
Thanks. Mr. Slocum?
Yeah, mine's a question and a comment. I'll start with a comment. On your first slide, under the category, what we provide through our budget, obviously, number one is educating the kids.
Right.
Which is good. I'm glad that's still number one. Number two begins with mental health. It's not even preceded by nutrition, because I know we have to feed them lunches and in some cases breakfast. I know that there's a lot we have to do in our school system because there's demands coming from parents. There's expectations that are higher than I might think they should be. And there's also rules from the state and federal government. I guess in the mental health thing, because we're going to be reading about COVID for the next 20 years, about the experiment and how it failed or how it was great. I have heard one thing throughout this budget process all the time, and it's about mental health and how everybody's somewhat a mess or been harmed and impacted by this. I guess my question is, how and when do we get to measure that? And what are you guys really investing in it? I'm not expecting you to invest more, but how distracting is it?
Tim, first of all, I think that's a great question. Mental health is more of a prominent topic, not only within education, but I think nationally, as we, I think people were impacted to different degrees. I want to be clear on this slide that there wasn't any intent to prioritize any of the language. It just probably read better when we wrote it, and that's why mental health leads. It could also be the fact that I have a background, my master's degree in counseling and psychological services, and that is a history.
It's not
as
even a
therapist.
critique; it's an observation.
Yes, and so it may have been subconscious on my part, is what I'm saying. But for mental health, I think what we're focused on, and this isn't new for us, we, as I indicated before, back in 2016, adopted social emotional learning is one of our marquee initiatives, and that is really a focus on making sure students are self-aware, that they're can initiate on their own, recognize when they're kind of distracted, whether it be by a friend or their own emotions and thoughts. We teach a lot of emotional regulation. So, this started back actually in the early 20 teens when I was at Cheshire High School as a principal, and we were teaching students mindfulness, just being self-aware and how to regulate those emotions. Things like a self-scan where you relax, focus on your breathing. We teach little kids the 5-second where they breathe in, breathe out, and our youngest students know that. And why it's important is when I was at Cheshire High School, after we did that for 10 weeks with kids through English classes, and the data that they provided us was that, I use this to help me sleep at night. And that just blew my mind, that 15-year-old kids are having trouble sleeping at night. The reason social emotional learning is one of our marquee initiatives is because kids told me it had to be. When I met with students about what, hey, let's talk about complex thinking. What are we missing? And, they pointed out, social stressors in 2016. Those things are still there. We focus on coaching kids around strategies to be able to access learning a little bit better. We do things like mood meters that, where are you on this chart? Red, yellow, green, blue, and each, cut down into smaller squares that talk about, different levels of emotion. Pinpoint for us as adults, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint where we are emotionally. Teaching our kids that strategy. Okay, is that where you want to be? How do we adjust that then? And that's the sort of thing that we're doing, focusing on mental health. Now, where people need more substantial mental health intervention, that is not the role of the school system. That is the role of people like Michelle Piccirillo and folks who operate, outside the school system. That being said, we have professionals who can evaluate, even provide therapy and supports to students to make the classroom accessible. When you need beyond that, though, that's really where we refer out. I don't know if that fully answers your question,
Well,
Tim, or if
I
there's
guess
another
I
nuance
know
part.
it's a concern. I mean, I've heard about young men between 20 and 30 actually having left the workplace because they're drug dependent.
Yeah.
And it actually is showing up in unemployment numbers
Sure.
because we have full employment in just about anything, and that's a shortfall right there. So there's a lot occurring, you and I have nothing we can do about it, but I know it's a reality. And at what point does it become a distraction that's expensive?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the 20 to 30, we can't do anything about. The
Well, we
10
can
to
now.
20, the 5 to 20, I can. And I think what we're trying to teach kids is the skills to navigate the stressors that they're going to incur, pandemic or not. Life can be stressful, particularly today. We're all bombarded with media and social media for our kids, and teaching the kids the skills to recognize when what am I feeling? Do I need to get help with this? Do I need to adjust this? And I commend your support and really thank your support on our teen mental health first aid, work that Michelle brought before you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just another step in the sort of, when I talk about mental health, that's what we're talking about, destigmatizing it. I wouldn't be ashamed to admit that I had a cold or a cut. If I'm not doing well, with my mental health, that needs to be addressed. If it's not, those things can, flourish into more substantial, costly problems. Coaching kids about how to navigate that at younger ages, I think, is not just cost avoidant in terms of, money, but life and time and joy. And that's really the bigger driver for us. And education, obviously.
As a pedestrian in town, driving a car or walking somewhere, I mean, I think most of us don't see kids outside. We see them going into school, or we see them on our ball fields.
Sure.
To me, that's a really refreshing moment. Kids are out and doing stuff, but who really knows what goes on? And I know our folks have expectations about teachers, about educators, maybe less expectations about parenting. I don't even know all the problems, but I know they're big and they loom large, and it's not part of an operating budget cycle, I guess, but I had to ask the question, and I appreciate your effort. And also, I want to echo what all of my colleagues have said, or those that have stated. You guys do a great job. I know you do the best that you can. I do, in fact, think you're properly funded and have been. I think you're not short of resources. You use them wisely. And to the extent we can shorten up on what we extract from the public so that they can have more to spend at our stores and our groceries, which are costing more and more, that's our job too. And I know you understand that, and you've expressed that very well tonight. With that, Mr. Bowery, I'm going to turn this back to you. I'm done with that comment.
Council, Mr. Belliver?
Thank you very much. And I'll echo as well. I think, the schools have done a great job. I think all of us have appreciated, especially those with kids in the school system, you being able to keep the schools open and having the kids attending consistently throughout the pandemic. I think that has been a tremendous benefit to the town, to the kids themselves, to parents, to everyone. I think that's been amazing. And I don't know how other school systems have kept the kids home and remote for so long as they did that, and the impact that that must have had on the families to do that. So that has been a tremendous accomplishment. And I think we're all very happy and for that and all the things that you've done in the school system. So thank you for that over the past couple of years.
Thank you.
I have just a couple quick questions, and they're diverse, but I'll start with this one. In your slides, I believe, so if I'm running, you think you're only asking for 3 extra teachers to keep what you think to keep the class sizes as where you think are at an acceptable level?
Adding 3 teachers
Right.
will result, based on the projections
Right.
that admittedly are a bit dated back in
Right.
January, will maintain the ratios that you saw on the slide deck.
Okay. All right. And I just want to make sure I understand. So you're at this point, we're only at three added teachers.
Correct.
Currently.
Technically, you could consider that 4th teacher in the transition program,
Right.
Given that 33% enrollment increase.
Right. But as far as
Yeah.
in a classroom,
Correct.
keeping class sizes down,
Correct.
only 3. Oh, wait. And then my other question, and I couldn't find it in here, but I'm sure it's in here somewhere. And I know this is a question that I've raised, I think in the last budget or the budget before, and that just goes to food services. And I want to find out how things are going with food services. I know, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a $300,000 drop in there primarily through COVID. And I just wanted to find out how are you handling food services going forward? How were they in the current budget? And I also want to find out, I think in the last year, the federal government or state have been picking up the tab. We've basically had free food services for the last year or so. And I want to find out what's the plan going forward and how are you adjusting for that?
Okay, let me start with this, and Dr. Sullivan can help me here on some of the items. The food service budget is not in the operating budget. Food service operates independently, essentially the revenues we collect when we're charging for meals or when they're free and or reduced. I'll talk about that in a minute. Those revenues pay for purchasing the food, the staff that, makes the food and, sells the food at the point of sale. So it is an independent operation. Not going to find it in our operating budget. And there's always excuse me? They're independent of our budget because they operate their own revenue and expenses, right? So they have their own separate budget, which I do oversee. And in a typical year, if, the sales of food are not as high as expected, the way it's adjusted is by, reducing labor costs primarily, right? If participation is down, we need less people. So it's managed as a business. 2 years ago, when the pandemic hit, really what the root cause of the losses that we had in food service, one, we didn't have as many kids in our schools. Forget about the 3-month period from March till June, right? Because we still were in the black that year. But last fiscal year, a lot of students were remote. The high school, which is our, the highest number of students and has the largest food service program, students were only in the building 4 days a week, and only half the students were in the building for those 4 days. So we were completely shut down 1 day a week. So that was a big hit on the high school revenue. So on top of that, one of the profit centers we have is selling water and snacks. That went to near nil. So last year, the Board of Ed did have to supplement food service with it was actually a $275,000 infusion to keep it at break even, which, believe it or not, we're required to do. This year, all students are back. The high school is back 5 days a week. We're doing some novel things this year. We're selling smoothies out of the high school. We did paninis. So our revenues are back up, even though the federal government is paying for all breakfast and all lunch meals. We are facing some pressure on the expense side because the cost of food has gone up very, very high. And there are shortages of some products, but we're able to substitute. You know, food service is very technical, so when I say a breakfast or a lunch, it has to consist of specific components to be reimbursable. We're back in the black this year. You know, we do expect that we will build back our reserve. The food service department is allowed to have up to 3 months worth of sales as reserves. So that amounts to a few $100,000 at its maximum. Next year, things will change. A couple of things are driving that. One, the way that the meals were paid for by the federal government this year was through a series of different waivers. Those waivers have not been extended into next year. So next year, we're back to kind of a normal pre-pandemic food service program. And families that qualify for free meals or reduced price meals will pay those either none or reduced prices, which in the case of Cheshire, we're lucky it's less than 20% of the total population of students. And then parents will be paying for meals for their students. What we don't know just yet is, you know, what's going to happen to our participation rate. But right now, on average, we're at about a 65% participation rate. So even though meals are free, not every student is taking advantage of it. So if participation rates drop, if the cost of food services is high, that's going to present a financial challenge that we'll work through. You know, one of the things that we can do, which we did speak to the board at our last Board of Ed meeting, is raise food prices. You know, the initial reaction from the board was they didn't want to do that, especially because of the pressures all families are facing right now. So we'll, you know, start the school year, see how we're doing, work to increase if the participation is down, you know, through marketing that we typically do, try and get the participation rates up, hopefully not have to increase the cost of meals for those that are paying, and hopefully the cost of food subsides a bit. Again, long-winded answer, but you asked it, and so I wanted to give a thorough answer.
Right, and I appreciate it because I know that the federal funding was coming off this year. So I just wanted to see how that was going to affect the budgeting on the food services.
And there is a bill that the senators have raised to try and restore the waivers for next year in Congress. This is at the federal level. I don't know what the status of that or if it will pass, but you know, there certainly is a lot of concern about those waivers expiring so quickly. The School Nutrition Association of Connecticut, you know, has been lobbying pretty aggressively on the state side to at least try and get the state to provide some supplemental funding so we don't go from full funding of meals to no funding of meals other than free and reduced. So, you know, maybe we'll get lucky in that sense.
Thank you.
Sensing you're all putting your budget books away because we're at the 2-hour mark. I still have, and I'm sorry, I won't keep you long, but I still have a couple of mundane, Mr. Slocum, Mr. Slocum very eloquently said exactly what I think is the point, and that is that, you know, you're doing a great job. We've all said that, but our job is not just to assess that you're doing a great job. It's how much can we as a community afford to be able to spend on all the different departments. So I have a couple more questions towards my analysis so I can make a decision. How are we doing on this year's budget? And are you going to be have anything left over that maybe you can pre-spend for some of next year's stuff?
So this year's, I update the board every month at our at the finance portion. So our budget this year is running fine. We did incur expenses related to, Dr. Solon mentioned, tents. Also the intraday cleaning that we were doing in all our schools, which, you know, provided, you know, assurances to all the staff, especially as we were going through the earlier part of this year where the pandemic was still raging. Those continued actually until last Friday, and then we did stop it. So we incurred some I call them health and safety expenses related to COVID, which we'll be able to absorb within the operating budget. You know, most of our other line items that we typically worry about, especially around special education, those are running just fine this year, so we'll meet the budget there. We've faced some pressure on fuel prices for the buses and for heating the buildings. Heating season's over. Again, I think we'll be able to absorb that, readily within the budget. So will we have anything that we can, close out the year with? I'm not sure. I know one of the things that the board will be interested in is we put some additional funding into the reserve fund, the medical benefits reserve fund, just to shore that up a little bit. That might be the first place we go, but we won't be asking for any additional funding this year, Mr. Barrow.
Well, that's turning that around. I was not expecting it to go that. I certainly would not expect that.
No, budgets, we're running okay.
I would caution against hearing what our discussion is with the medical fund balance. I would caution against taking extra money and putting it there, unless you're going to lower the amount that you're going to put in each month next year, which we don't really want to do. We want to budget to what it is, because we know that fund, as the auditors look at and the rating agencies look at, we know that fund has significant extra available funds that could be a backstop, whether it's from the general town government side or the Board of Ed side. There's significant funds in there that can be a backstop. So I mean, I would love to see, I've got a couple $100,000 left over the end of the year. Let's pre-buy some things for next year so we can lower next year's budget a little bit. Kind of like we buy salt for Public Works Garage and things like that, this year, so we don't maybe have to fund as much next year, because, it's a 4.1% increase, or $4.1 million more. It's a lot. I mean, I don't know that, irrespective of our accounting change we made in February, and 1.3 mils is a lot. So I for one would like to try to see that lowered a little bit, but I'm not questioning at all the need for the additional staff, because I know the students are coming there, and I don't think any of us have. So I think that's, but there are things other than that might have to be looked at. Like, is there a little bit of a surplus this year that maybe could make next year a little bit easier, or let it lapse into surplus, and that helps as well.
Just to address that point, if I may. So, one of the way that we manage our budget within the fiscal year is we do put a cap on the amount that can be spent on a percentage basis at the schools and each department. And so we're right now at a 70% cap, and as we hit April and May, we raise that cap, and some of the things that we do are to buy what we will need for school supplies, paper, do maintenance work over the summer. So, I'm factoring that all in, to what we need to do as we close out this year. So I just wanted not to neglect that question that you asked. And if you look at what we requested for next year's budget, we were pretty aggressive at not asking for an increase on a lot of those instructional supply, textbook, office supplies. We just zeroed those out. When we started this budget process, we knew that there was going to be significant pressure based on enrollment and based on the medical benefits piece. So we will need to do as much of that as we can. So we're kind of holding back on what we have this year so that we can fund some of the items we need for next year.
See, and I thought you did that to make our job harder, but that's what happened. In reality, you've taken some of the tools away that we've used to reduce your request to, and it's a reasonable request. It's not unreasonable at all, I have to say that. But we do have to look for ways to put all the together from the different departments, and you were the last one, the biggest one, the most significant in many ways. And so now we've got to start deliberations. We're going to have a workshop on Thursday evening. I'm working on a draft as a chairman's budget, just to have a discussion, not that necessarily that's written in stone, but just to have a discussion so that we can move forward. And then next week we have a public information session around 6 o'clock, our regular council meeting night. And then we will move on to the following week for more deliberations and then adopt by the 28th. I think that's the night we have scheduled to try to adopt. So that's our schedule, our timetable. And obviously we will be in discussions, you and I.
Thank you. We won't be in attendance on Thursday, not because we aren't interested, but we do have a planning meeting at 6 and a board meeting at 7:30.
That's fine. Okay, we'll duly
Have to
noted.
look
one-
on next
Another
Tuesday.
100 off.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
No,
We'll never do that.
I know.
All right, Mr. Mylone has a
I
question.
just had one last question. I saw the increase in enrollment in the lower grades and the increase in teachers. I noticed there's if I understood it correctly, there's a dramatic decrease in enrollment in the high school level. I haven't seen the SLAM report, and I don't know whether that's projected to continue, or if I've misunderstood the presentation. One of the slides showed about minus 82 pupil reduction. Are we looking at if that's continuing? Are there potential savings at the high school level, both in the short term and in the longer term that we're considering, or is that not appropriate?
I
some
think it's a
reason.
good question, John. The reason that when we negotiated our contract with the teachers a couple of years back, we were aware of that projection and that reduction in the enrollment. When we went from 6 periods per teacher to 5, we are able to sustain the classes that we offer. Keep in mind, they're teaching less classes. So that's where we are in terms of the reason we were able to negotiate the price, the rate, the wage, and the benefits package is lower as we have it, was because we made that adjustment knowing that we wouldn't therefore be reducing teachers, but keeping status quo with less kids. This was a time to sustain that. But that being said, I think, Vin and I have spent the majority of our time since receiving that SLAM report evaluating the implications for school modernization. In the coming days, we were literally just up in South Windsor this afternoon looking at schools. We need to, there's a deadline on our ed specs report too, and I know we'll be talking about that in the near future. We will be continuing to evaluate that report in terms of staffing at both the high school and lower grades as well. So we will. I'll pass you guys along that SLAM report as well. I have a bit of a laundry list to send you now between this PowerPoint, our bounce forward plan. I had already written the SLAM data as well. So, these are all a lot of things you guys obviously have to consider. And I want to point out too that in no way was I insinuating that, we're underfunded with respect to education, as much as I was illustrating that we do a very good job with our efficiency. So,
I don't think we took it that way.
no, okay. I didn't want to offend anybody with that. That wasn't my intent.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All set. Any other final questions or comments, Mr. Slocum?
It's not so much as a comment, but I will mention to you, Jeff, that at our April 12th meeting, the council will be presented a pretty in-depth review of what's been taking place in committee, that we've been having our weekly meetings, stuff like that. And I know you're not apt to be in attendance. You may be, maybe Vincent will be, but we'll have the team from Colliers. I want them to present to the council, just as you're going to be presenting, I believe, the same week to planning. Your planning group.
Well, this week, actually, Thursday. we're
Okay, so
presenting
they're
6
getting it
o'clock this
first, but
week.
that's
Yep.
terrific. So what I was going
Yep.
to suggest was you can hold your stuff, and it can all be delivered, maybe at the same time when we get our packets, because we'll talk about that at our meeting tomorrow afternoon, but I want to have a very fulsome review for the council.
Great.
So they all know where we stand, and the whole thing looks like it's standing. So that's coming, and that'll be good. So your board, Adam, are welcome for that meeting, and anyone else who wants to attend.
Mr. Chairman, the budget portion's over. I'll hand it back to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. Well, this is a great meeting. Thank you all for attending, and I know we're always happy to vote for adjournment. So with that said, I'll ask for.
Always unanimous support.
Thank you.